most views. All right, so we're all live. I want to thank you guys so much for watching another episode of the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. This is Corey DeAngelis, your host, joined by the co-host, who is the founder of the Educational Freedom Institute, Matthew Nielsen. We have a very exciting episode today with a very special guest, Senator Patricia Rucker from West Virginia. For a lot of people who are following along on social media, they've seen some breaking news come out of West Virginia on the school choice front, or what we call funding students as opposed to institutions. And the West Virginia Legislature, just a couple of days ago, the Senate passed a bill which is the most expansive bill this year that we've seen to fund students as opposed to institutions. And if this gets signed into law by the governor soon, it will be the most expansive education savings account program in the country. So without further ado, we have with us, and we're lucky to have with us today, Senator Patricia Rucker from West Virginia, who is one of the most staunch, one of the greatest advocates of this bill, which is House Bill 2013, Hope Scholarship Program, that was just passed by the Senate by 20 to 13 vote just 2 days ago. So thank you so much for joining us, Senator Rucker.
Thank you, and it is an honor to be on. And of course, I follow you closely, Corey, and I love all that you do to help fight for educational freedom.
Thank you so much. And yeah, again, thanks for being with us. Could you give us a little bit of a background on what the bill actually does and why it's such an important and expansive bill? Because there are some states that have education savings account programs already, just a handful of them, but they're pretty small programs. So could you give us a little bit of a background on all of that? And then also, if you want to go into West Virginia's fight for school choice over the past couple of years, and the role that you've played in that fight.
Sure. So real briefly, our Hope Scholarship Program is, like you said, an ESA program. It creates a fund for, I guess we should start off by saying, eligible students, which is defined as any public school student who is enrolled in attending at least 45 days or the previous year, or is eligible to start kindergarten. So any West Virginia resident who fits that criteria is able to apply and get a Hope Scholarship instead of attending public school. And the Hope Scholarship would be 100% of the state aid portion average that the state funds per student for their education. So in the state of West Virginia, that comes out to about $4,600, which is not a lot. I mean, compared to other states' ESAs, it's actually on the lower end, but it is 100% of the state aid portion. So it actually is as high as, is reasonable, because we can't be making the counties pay for something that we don't have access to. They raise it and they keep it themselves locally. Having said that, that's it. That's the eligibility requirements, which means that we did not put limitations based on income. We did not put limitations based on the students' needs. And in the arguments regarding this ESA program, all of those questions came up. And my response, and the response of, I would say the legislators who supported this, is why would we limit? But if a child is in need and they're not thriving in public schools, why would we limit and remove some of them from having access to help? Because if our goal is that every child deserves a good quality education, if they're not receiving it through the public education system, then let's help them find it wherever that may be. And fortunately, in the state of West Virginia, the average cost of private education is around $5,000 a year. So that $4,600, which is a very low amount compared to other states, is actually a significant amount and really does provide school choices here in West Virginia. And in terms of how we got here, I will tell you that I have introduced an ESA bill every single year. And 2 years ago, where we had enough money to be able to provide a significant investment in our public education, the Senate in West Virginia, and myself as Senate Education Chair, thought that if we want to invest in public education, we should also provide a little bit of school choice in the state of West Virginia. As of 2 years ago, we didn't have any school choice. And when I say any, I mean literally no school choice in the state of West Virginia. Folks who know a little bit about the history of West Virginia would be able to tell you that it has been traditionally a state controlled by very strong unions in lots of aspects, and definitely public education. So those of us who were in the Senate 2 years ago really felt very strongly that we need to do some school choice. And so we had an education reform bill that included teacher pay raises, that included a lot more money for county public school systems. It strengthened teachers' role in the classroom. It empowered them. There were several measures in there that would help encourage areas that we didn't have enough certified teachers in. We also added I guess you would say it was like a teacher scholarship, and we made it more of what it's supposed to be, a real enticement to try to get teachers in West Virginia to stay in West Virginia and teach in West Virginia. And on top of that, we were begging for a little bit of school choice. So the school choice provisions in that bill was open enrollment, allowing public charter schools in the state, and ESAs. Well, that was a very, very controversial bill, and took most of the oxygen from that legislative session. And the teachers' unions went on strike, and they managed to table the bill indefinitely. And, that's okay, right? I mean, that's what the democratic process is. And when they tabled that bill indefinitely, we said, okay, well, we tried. But then they wanted their teacher pay raises after having killed that bill. And we said, well, sorry, you guys killed that bill that had the teacher pay raises. And we are not interested in doing the pay raises unless we get some school choice. So because the Senate refused to provide them their pay raises, the governor basically had to come to the table with us. And he was, against what we were trying to do in education reform. But he had to come to the table and understand that we were not going to relent on this, and that this was an absolute priority for us. So he agreed to call a special session just for education reform. And out of that special session, we did get the public charter schools being allowed in the state and the open enrollment, but the ESA didn't survive. So that was very disappointing for me. But I told folks at the end of that special session, when we got just a teeny tiny bit of school choice, I told them, if I'm here in 2 years, because, I don't know if I'm going to win the election, but if I'm here in 2 years, I'm coming back, and this is going to be a priority. And I got reelected by my constituents, and we made it a priority.
Excellent to hear what's gone on over the past couple of years. I was following that in 2019 and was disappointed when the ESA just got ripped out. But it was great that some charter school legislation got passed in 2019. But what's interesting to me is how in just a couple of years, West Virginia is essentially going from 0 to 100 on school choice. I mean, West Virginia was one of the last states without a charter school law as of 2018. Then 2019, you guys allowed for it. And then no private school choice programs whatsoever currently, even right now in West Virginia. And right now, what we're seeing play out is the House and the Senate, by solid margins, passed one of the most expansive programs in the history of the United States just a couple of days ago. So what happened? I mean, a couple of years ago it was a fight. Barely got, we got the charter school law on the books and couldn't get the ESA. And then this year, boom, passed it through the House and Senate with pretty large margins. What is there any type of difference? Was it just, a incremental fight that we finally reached escape velocity on school choice? What could you give us on that?
Well, I can tell you in 2 words: elections matter. The teachers' unions, which had such a stronghold when it comes to public education and supporting it at all costs and allowing no competition at all, they put every resource they could into unseating those state senators who dared be in the way. Those 18 that caused us to get that little bit of education reform 2 years ago. And they were determined to get us out of office. And not only did they not succeed, pretty much all but one of those senators won re-election this past November, and with stronger Republican majorities than even 2 years ago. So I'm grateful that they did target us, because I think they really made it an issue that got decided in the West Virginia elections. And Corey, as well as I do, although the teachers' unions are entitled to their opinion, parents and even the majority of teachers, they're not on the same side as the unions that represent them. I know many teachers who, beg me, please don't tell anyone that I have said this to you, but I support what you're trying to do, because my child is not thriving in the public school system. And I wish I had the funds to be able to get them someplace and more help. And, the number of folks who are happy with the public education system is always the majority. The satisfaction rates for public education is almost always in the 80 percentile, 85 percentile. Mm-hmm. But, the traditional public education system is successful for the vast majority, but is never going to be able to take care of every single situation. And there's always those unique individual cases and folks who are asking for something different. And this past year with the pandemic, especially, when the teachers' unions were lambasting us for wanting education choice at the time that the public schools were closed to in-person education, and were essentially saying, hey, I know you pay all those tax dollars, but we're not going to provide your kids an education right now. I think that didn't help them very much when it came to the election.
I'm sure that didn't help him at all. I have one quick comment, Senator, and then a question for you. First, Corey and I were talking the other day, and when your bill was, when this bill was coming up, and by the way, just real quick, point of clarification. Were you the sponsor on this, the primary sponsor for this bill? Were you a co-sponsor? How did that work?
So I was the primary sponsor in the Senate version, but the version that ended up running was the House version, and that was by agreement. We agreed, both the leadership in the Senate and the House, that we would let the House lead. Since the Senate had passed ESAs multiple times and it didn't make it through the House, we figured, let's see what the House can send to us.
Good. So when we were talking through this and it was coming up, it was the night before, Corey and I were texting back and forth saying, there's a lot coming up tomorrow, and West Virginia was on the list, right? And I remember I texted Corey back and I said, man, I really am excited about in 2 states in particular. I want them all to pass, right? Of course, all of them I want to pass. But there were 2 states on my list, and West Virginia was absolutely one of those 2, because you guys, like Corey said earlier, have gone from 0 to 60, right? It's like in no time, in short order, you guys went from essentially nothing to that. So I just want to say congratulations for the work that you've done. This program, I'm sure, is going to serve thousands and thousands of kids that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunities that they will. So that's my comment. And now my question for you is, what along the way, what were some of the big hurdles? At any point did you say, I don't know about this, it's not going to work? Or I'm sure you had some of those feelings on certain days where something would happen or someone would say something. Tell us about the process that it went through.
So I will tell you that, I mean, clearly I've been introducing this for years and years and years, and most years it never even made it to any committee agenda. One big hurdle I have to admit to is having education chairs that would be willing to take on the teachers union, that would be willing to have that battle. And I'm very grateful that my Senate leadership gave me that honor 2 years ago. They knew what they were getting when they asked her, gave me that honor. I will tell you, I mean, I have never been silent about the need for more choices for parents. And as someone who had to homeschool my children myself, when we passed this ESA bill 2 years ago, and then also just last week when we passed it out of Senate Education Committee, I told folks from the heart, how my family is one of the many families who the public education system, traditional classroom system, did not provide for the unique needs of my special needs children. 2 out of my 5 children have particular and unique needs. They're not severe enough to really require special education inclusive classroom, but they needed support that was not available in the traditional classroom. So when I wanted to get them what they needed in the public education system, they weren't able to do so. And as I pointed out and have pointed out multiple times, I'm not blaming the teachers for that. I'm not blaming the traditional public schools for that. They're unique. They don't fit the mold. And therefore, I ended up homeschooling. And because I was 2 kids with special needs, I had to homeschool. I ended up homeschooling all 5. And thank God I was able to. Thank God I had a husband who could support me. Thank God I had the ability as a former public school teacher. I had some comfort level with teaching, but not everyone has that. So what we are doing when we are denying choices to parents, because that's what those who oppose this legislation, that's what they're doing. They're denying choices to parents and families. What you're doing is, it's not about protecting the public education system. You are denying that child the ability to do what is best for them. You're denying that child the opportunity and the chance that America, I believe, is all about, which is that we have an opportunity to be great. An education is absolutely essential for that. And again, whenever I had these battles, and you're talking about, impediments, the biggest impediment is getting that through to people, to get them to understand this doesn't have to be either or. It's not you support public education or you support school choice. It's and.
Yeah.
Excellent. Inspirational, just like the person in the comments said. So it's great that you got this done, but getting into those hurdles again, what did the opposition try to do to try to stop you guys? I mean, it seems like it passed pretty with great margins, but of course, as I've seen in other states, there must have been some opposition and tactics to try to prevent educational freedom from expanding in your state. So this year in particular, what are some of the things that you saw? Was it the same as the previous years? Did they try new things this year? What are some of those tactics?
So it was definitely toned down this year from what it was 2 years ago. I mean, the teacher strikes are pretty big impediment to overcome. But I will say that, the accusations, you're trying to defund public education. I found it quite humorous that we had Democrats who were saying we're being fiscally irresponsible. I just thought that was really funny. They wanted us to amend limits into the legislation. So they wanted to limit the eligibility. And they always portray it as, sure, we understand what you're trying to say about helping those kids. So let's just make it just special education students.
And they still voted down anyway.
And they would still vote against it. Or the income, limited by income. So you're only helping a certain.
Still vote against it.
And they would have still voted against it. So I'm really grateful. Like, again, those tactics, They did all of those same tactics 2 years ago, and still it was a straight line partisan vote, not a single Democrat. And we did limit the bill 2 years ago. The ESA bill we were trying to get through in order to start, to put the nose under the camel's tent, to begin giving some choice. It was limited by income, and it was limited to special needs students and victims of bullying. So it was much more limiting than this was. And it was still the exact same people who voted no and the exact same people who voted yes. So clearly, having run through that, it didn't work this time. We just didn't accept those amendments.
So I remember one amendment in particular this session. It went down from like 4,600 to 3,000, then it went back up. Could you talk about why there was that back? And then I think there were amendments about like if you're switching out of a public school or not. Could you give us updates on those two things?
There were a couple big amendments, okay? So one really big one happened on the House floor, that in 5 years after this, ESAs begin, it would no longer just be public students, and it would open to every private school and homeschool student in the state. And it passed overwhelmingly, and it passed that way. And was supposed to be sent over to us. Before it got reported to the Senate, the House recommitted it to House Finance. And it sat in House Finance for a week while they, I think, were negotiating and talking and discussing options, because that amendment would, of course, create a much bigger fiscal implication for the future, even though it was 5 years down the road. So they did they kept that amendment, but they amended that amendment to say, if the participation rate of ESAs in 5 years is 5% or more, then that amendment doesn't take effect, the one that opens it up to everyone. But if it's 5% or less, it will open it up. So that was that's how that amendment, changed through the process. And then, yes, in-house finance, the reason it got amended down to 3,000 is because there were some Republicans who were worried about the fiscal implications and who wanted to reduce the fiscal note. But what happened, and this is part of the process, for those who are not familiar with the legislative process, right? You have an office that gives you fiscal notes, that tells you what we think this is going to cost. Well, the fiscal note was taken into account that in 5 years, everyone in the whole state could potentially sign on. So they were counting the number of homeschoolers and private schoolers that we have right now in the state, and 100% of them signing on to the whole scholarship, and that's what the fiscal note showed. So they reduced it to 3%, and the fiscal note didn't change because it's based on a projection of what could happen 5 years from now. And there were many of us who pointed out to them, first of all, we know that there are a lot of homeschoolers who would not be interested in this because it comes with strings attached, and homeschoolers do not want strings attached. Number two, private school students and families who are able to afford private schools, very few of them are going to change the way they're doing things. And we require at least 45 minimum attendance into public schools. That's midway through a semester. Like, no one is going to be pulling their kid midway, that's just not going to happen. And the numbers of private school students and homeschool students right now in West Virginia is going to be completely different from 5 years from now. There's no way to estimate. They're never going to get 100% of them. That fiscal note is really irrelevant. So when we talk to House members, like this lowering down to 3,000, like what's the point of it? They decided to change it back to the 100% of the state aid average as it had been originally on the House floor again before sending it to the Senate, which made it a lot easier for us to just concur.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think I saw some opponents saying when it went down to 3,000, they were saying, well, this is going to make it harder for the least advantaged to afford private schools. Well, then it's like, okay, well, are you arguing to make the amount higher then? Would you support it if it was high? Would you support it if it was, about the same amount as what they spend in the public schools, which is what, like $13,000 or something,
right, around
in West Virginia? you'd be able to afford a lot more private options if you were to get about what they spend in the traditional public schools. But they wouldn't support that either. I mean, that's they make both arguments at the same time. So I have a question for you. A reporter from the Charleston Gazette Mail, Ryan Quinn, tweeted out earlier today that the governor, Jim Justice, said he's leaning towards signing the bill. Is that what you've heard as well? Do you think he'll sign it? Is there any chance that he would veto the bill? What have you heard?
Well, what I have heard is that, yes, he is leaning towards signing the bill. As you can imagine, this is what we consider a priority bill for the legislature. And the governor knew this before we even came here this session. In addition to that, just so you know, if he were to veto the bill, it would take a simple majority to override his veto. So with the numbers that we got in the Senate and the House, I doubt he would veto it.
That's that's good to know, because you have a way to get it back in. That's awesome.
Well, you guys are in better position than Kentucky. Kentucky, the night before you guys passed your sweeping bill through the legislature, their full legislature passed a bill that was not as expansive, but it was a education savings account program. But the margins weren't as big as your margins, and they have a Democrat governor who is known to not support private school choice, even though he sent his own kids to private schools. Whereas you guys have a Republican trifecta, so it's more likely to go well.
Do they have time to override the veto? Because that's the key point. Can they override his veto? Maybe. We'll
see. We'll see if he vetoes it. I mean, he'll make himself look like a hypocrite if he vetoes it, but we'll see what happens. But look, West Virginia is the big whammy proposal. That's the one everybody's been watching for months. And this is super exciting that it passed through the legislature and looks like it's going to be signed by the governor. We have a question from the audience. Alan, he watches a lot of our live streams. He says he wants to ask you if educational choice will be an election issue next year.
I'm sure that it will. I'm sure that the teacher associations will once again attempt to portray us as somehow hurting public schools. And, they're welcome to try. It's a free country. I don't think it's going to fly.
Well, you guys picked an amazing year to run the bill again, because this is, parents, like I heard Corey say earlier today that parents are waking up to the fact that they need options, and the pandemic, for all of the bad that it's done, has, and no doubt that it has, we've all experienced that, I'm sure, in one way or another. The good that's come out of that, if there's a silver lining, this is it. It's that parents are waking up to the fact that, hey, wait a second, maybe this isn't exactly what I want out of my child's school. And so this ESA program that you've run and passed, it's awesome. And a lot of people are going to benefit from that. So great work.
Thank you.
Did you, throughout the process, were there hesitations from your colleagues? Did they come to you saying, well, what about this? What about that? Or anything else, other details like that you could share?
I will tell you that the vast majority of my fellow legislators, both in the House and the Senate, came to me when they had questions, which I really appreciate because it gave me the opportunity to address them, like right away, before it festers, before it grows. There were some Republican colleagues, both in the House and the Senate, that didn't support this. And again, they have their reasons for it, and I respect their reasons. But overall, I really feel like it was very few objections. And most of the objections or questions or concerns had centered around what the associations keep repeating over and over again. It's somehow defunding public education, and having to show them the evidence, there are lots of states who have educational choice, and it has not defunded public education. And also explaining to them how, even if, let's say 1% of the parents or students leave the public education system, the reality is that the county money and the federal funds stay with the local schools, and the amount per pupil actually goes up in the public education system. So those type of things help alleviate a lot of those concerns and fears, I guess. And I will tell you again, this is not about not supporting traditional public education. The West Virginia Constitution guarantees that we fund a public education system, and it's going to be funded. And we even agree that there are things that we can fund better. But to me, and my thought, having choice actually strengthens the position of public education to get that additional funding. When you have competition in the system, it usually raises salaries.
Yeah.
Competing for those teachers, and you're competing for those services.
Yeah, 5 studies on that topic, either charter school or private school competition, they all find that the public school teacher salaries go up because the public schools start to allocate more resources to the classroom instead of on things like administrative bloat and staffing surges. So I'm glad you pointed that out, because a lot of people don't realize that. And then, also per pupil expenditures actually go up in response to these, just mathematically, because they're only taking the state portion, and whereas the rest of it stays. Well, if you want to increase per pupil revenues, this is the way to do it. If you want this achieves both things at the same time. So it's ridiculous when you're right, but when people say that this defunds the public schools, it does the opposite on a per pupil basis. Alan wanted to clarify his question real quick.
Oh.
He said he wants to know, I guess, if people. Well, one, I want to ask you: is this like becoming a Republican Party platform issue? Like, if you're a Republican, you need to. School choice is kind of one of the things that you should support. And then 2, do you foresee families pushing back against candidates that vote against school choice because they want choices?
Okay, so regarding the party platform, I can tell you that in the state of West Virginia, the party platform does have educational choice as part of its platform. I can't speak to the national, but I do know that our West Virginia party platform definitely includes that. And in terms of seeing a bigger pushback, again, I don't believe so. I don't believe that there's going to be a harder push against Republicans for supporting education choice. The education choice, the public charter schools is still funding the charter, like public schools. And this ESAs, which it's not just for Republicans, it's for Democrats, it's for independents, it's for everyone. It's not party lines. I do not see the individual West Virginian being upset about it, or actually the polls that we have done show that they're overwhelmingly in support of it. So I don't see a harder pushback. The associations have definitely suffered a very big defeat, and they spent millions of dollars against those senators, and they lost almost all those races. So they can try again. They're entitled to keep throwing their money, but I don't think it's going to get them anywhere. And again, our majorities in both the House and the Senate increased. So I just do not see there being, like, if they keep trying the same thing, that definition of insanity, I'm sure you've heard.
Yep.
I don't see that as being a harder push. I think it becomes easier. And also, those Republicans who are worried about the effect it will have, when the Republicans who supported educational choice before get reelected, it helps overcome those type of concerns or worries. So then they can be, I hope, more concerned about doing their job for their constituents.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the polling on this, Republicans and Democratic constituents alike support the concept of funding students instead of institutions. But it turns out that Republican lawmakers are much more likely to vote for these proposals than Democratic lawmakers. That's just what we've seen, even though it shouldn't be a partisan issue according to the polling. A lot of the times it is when you start thinking, and the reason for that probably has a lot to do with the influence of the teachers unions and where their campaign contributions go. But it shouldn't be like that.
It shouldn't be. I have to say it's really disappointing because the impact on these educational choice options is much higher on the low income and the minority population than on, the general population. And I can tell you, I pointed some of those things out during the debate. This is a bill that supports diversity. It supports the folks who are struggling to make ends meet, the single mom. It's amazing to me that there are those who say that they champion those folks, but not when it comes to education.
Well, not when it comes to K-12 education. I heard during the floor debates that this is public money. All money's private, originates from the taxpayer, going to private schools. Well, okay, do you want to get rid of Pell Grants and the GI Bill too? Oh, you want to get rid of the West Virginia pre-K programs? Oh, you want to get rid of the West Virginia scholarship programs for higher education because that's public money that could be used at private universities? No, of course they don't. They're only saying that because only when it comes to K-12 education does this threaten the special interest that profits from getting those dollars otherwise. It doesn't have that same kind of power dynamic in pre-K and higher education. And with food stamps, for example, the public, quote unquote, public dollars can be used at private restaurant or grocery institutions. Why is that not a problem? But it's only a problem with K-12 education. So
a very good point.
I mean, it's logical inconsistency, endless, and then there's tons of hypocrisy that goes on as well. We uncovered tons of hypocrisy this week on the Educational Freedom Institute school choice hypocrisy map of people in power who don't support extending school choice to others, but then exercise school choice for their own families, which is great. Everybody should do the best they can for their own children, but you shouldn't close the door behind you and not allow others to exercise that same kind of opportunity. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Senator Rucker. Could you leave us with some final words of wisdom and what you want people to take away from this conversation? I mean, hey, look, this is huge. And again, I want to thank you. I can't thank you enough for joining us on this podcast, especially since West Virginia is getting it done when it comes to educational freedom, and it only makes sense to have you on to talk about this on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. So yeah, what do you want to leave us with, and what should people do going forward to kind of check out what's going on in West Virginia?
So thank you very much. I can't really think of a brilliant closing statement. I will tell you that I am personally grateful to have the honor to be able to serve my fellow senators as Senate Education Chair. It has been an incredible battle, and I'm just so very grateful because as we pointed out at the beginning of the conversation 2 years ago, we were scrounging to just get the little tiniest bit of choice, and it feels so good now to be first in the nation on something that is good and wonderful and helps the people of West Virginia, and that has always been my goal. And in terms of, if you want to keep up with what's going on, the West Virginia Legislature has a website, a Facebook page, a Twitter feed. Just Google it, you'll be able to find that. And we do try to post daily what is going on both in the House and in the Senate.
Cool.
Totally. That sounds great. I put in a link to your Twitter for everybody that wants to go follow you. It's just at Rucker 4, spelled out FOR WV, which is an abbreviation for West Virginia. So Rucker 4 WV, if you want to follow Senator Rucker on Twitter. I'm also putting into the comments right now her webpage at the West Virginia Legislature as well, if you want to go check out other bills that she is sponsoring. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again, Senator Rucker, for coming out and discussing this with us. I want to thank everybody who joined us in the audience, in the chat, and on Twitter, and on different mediums, including Facebook and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us for the Educational Freedom Institute podcast this week. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you again.
Thank you.